Well, Ecclesiastes 12 is where we're at this morning, and um, speaking of just growing up and being around older people, um, because I've always been comfortable being around older people, and I always have. Uh, I'm not sure why I never really gravitated towards people my own age. Perhaps maybe it was insecurity. I don't know, but older people always just were. I had some people in my life that I can think about that, even when I was a teenager, Brother Hallbegger was a man I really respected and hung around a lot, and just people like him that invested in me. So it's just been where I've been at. And when you talk to older people, there's common threads with these folks. They like to. Sometimes I don't think they notice it, but they like to talk about their age and different aspects of their aging and how things are changing, and they like to tell you about what you can expect as you age and the things that they can't do now because they're aging and so on and so forth. There's that, and then hey, Brother Jeff.
Morning.
And then there's also them liking to give you advice about things that maybe mistakes they made or things you ought to do or you should consider. They're always interested in your life, older people are. They're always wanting to know what your plans are. And it's interesting because, oddly enough, I kind of, over the last few months, have discovered that I've been doing the same thing with some younger people, not realizing I was doing it. Now, I have a couple guys that I kind of mentor a little bit that are younger guys that I've just tried to be there for them because I sense they need kind of that dad figure in their life. And as I get older, I want to do more of that. But I've also noticed just at work with younger drivers that I find myself doing what I mentioned. Like I'll talk about, my back or things about my physical inabilities to things I can't do. Like we had a package the other day that was just massive heavy, and I just knew like there's no way I cannot get that thing in the truck. I just know my limits and I can't do it. And these young guys, they kind of look at you like you look like you're physically fit, but I just can't do it. Like you're gonna have to come down here and help me, or you're gonna have to do it. And then I've also found myself giving advice to younger people. One of our supervisors the other day, who is actually my boss's, who just retired, is his son, and he's going through some things about someone he's going to marry, and she's not, he's Catholic, and he was raised as Christian, and it's caused some issues, and I was trying to give him some advice on that, and then I found this, maybe talking to different young guys, like asking them, are you investing in a 401k? Are you doing any investing? This is the age. You want to start now. You need to start putting back, and you won't miss it if you'll just have it deducted out of your check. Because I look at the older generation before me, with even relatives that I know that didn't have that luxury. They worked for smaller companies. There was no 401ks. There was none of that. And so this generation today has the opportunity to take advantage of a lot. And I was one of them that had that opportunity. And I started investing when I was, as soon as I could. And it's amazing how many drivers I talk to that are in their 30s and even 40s that are not doing anything. And I'm like, you got to start. What are you planning to live on? So it's odd how we kind of find ourselves doing that as we get older. And, part of it is that we're wanting to help them, but we also want to keep them from making mistakes that perhaps we made in certain areas. And so when we read the book of Ecclesiastes and we read about all the things that we've read about over these last months, or at least several weeks with Solomon, Ecclesiastes, I started thinking this week, why did he write this? Why did he put all this on paper? And you could come up with a myriad of reasons, but there's at least two that I'm sure are part of the reasons as to why he put it on paper. And one of them is that sometimes just writing something down helps you. You ever notice journaling? People journal. That's a kind of a popular thing, journaling. But I think this is in a way is kind of a form of journaling that Solomon did. And if you ever noticed, if like sometimes you're struggling with something, just talking it out or writing it down, you almost can sometimes answer your own questions or figure out things. Like for instance, you'll go to a person about a problem you're having, and as you're relating the problem to them, you almost figure out the solution in while you're talking. Have you ever done that? I have multiple times. And you wonder if part of that is with Solomon here, just writing it out. Sometimes he just needed to see or hear what he is actually saying himself. Of course, then the obvious is that he wants, and he talks about this later in the chapter, is that he wants us to avoid many of the mistakes that he made. And he's trying to give counsel as an older person to the younger generation. So in this final chapter, we see that it's a lot less about life under the sun, and it's more about who made the sun. And so that's what you'll see here in this last chapter as we get to it. And it kind of is in the same light as what we were at last week, as he talks about death. He talks about getting older. That's why I made Kayla say, you might be a little uncomfortable with some of this morning, but nonetheless, you're on a road well traveled, and we haven't fixed the potholes before you get there. So the same potholes will be there when you get there, as they were from the generation before us. So anyway, before we open this morning, I hate to hit you off the cuff there, Brother Tom, but would you mind opening us in prayer this morning as we get into Ecclesiastes 12?
Father, thank you so much for today. What a great day you've made. It's a day that we get to come to your house and to celebrate and worship you. We thank you for your word that we're about ready to read in Ecclesiastes. We ask that you would breathe new life into us through your word. We know your word brings life, and we need life, Lord. Thank you for your son, Jesus. Thank you for everyone who's here and online, and even those who can't join us today, Lord. We pray that you bless them through your word. Please be with all those down the coast, Lord, as they prepare for a hurricane. Help them to be safe. Help us to serve in any way we can. We pray in Jesus' name.
Amen. Amen. In verse 1 of Ecclesiastes 12, Solomon starts it this way. Remember now your Creator in the days of your youth, while the evil days come not, nor the years draw nigh, when you shall say, I have no pleasure in them. I love this reference right off the top that Solomon states, remember now your Creator. Your Creator. I love that term, your Creator. It's such a personal way to describe God. I've been using that particular phrase often here in the last few years, especially when witnessing to people. I refer to God as your Creator to someone. I'm trying to make it personal. Like, regardless of what you think of God, He's your Creator. You may not think of Him as your God, but He thinks of you as His. Even though you haven't acknowledged Him yet, He still sees you as His creation. And when we think of God as our Creator, and we'll get to this at the very bottom of chapter 12, he makes reference to this, it demonstrates that if He is our Creator, then there's a responsibility due to Him. And he basically says that at the end of this chapter. If you think about the forming of a human inside of a mother, isn't it amazing? It's just awesome. It's just a beautiful thing to see a life that's formed inside of a mother. And, I saw a mother the other day, and it just struck me. She was doing what mothers do when they put their hand on their belly. You ever seen that where mamas always it's like they're kind of caressing the child inside. They know the baby's in there. They're starting to love it before it's even born. That's their baby inside of them. We as men cannot totally comprehend that, what women go through. But to think that what happens inside of a mother's womb with that baby, and the fact that bones are formed in the mother's womb. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that happens, but there's bones that form in the mother. Isn't that awesome? It really, really is. But there's something else that happens with that baby that really has nothing to do with the mother. And Solomon will reference it again at the end of the chapter. And that is the spirit. There's a spirit that's inside of that baby. That has nothing to do with the mother. The mother could have a child that's stillborn. The body's still there. It was formed in her. It's still a miracle, but it didn't have its spirit. The person's not in the body. We'll get to more of that in detail. So I love the fact that Solomon refers to God as our creator, because we oftentimes look at God as being just God. It's big, broad. And we think that God just looks at his creation like an ant pile. Like, well, that's an ant pile. But God doesn't. He sees it as an ant in the ant pile. It's not that God looks at the earth and sees 7 billion people. He sees one person. We can't comprehend that. Our minds are finite. We can't see it that way. God sees earth, but he sees Kevin. At the same time, sees Tom, sees Joel, sees all of us as individuals. So it's a personal thing with God. And what Solomon wants to do is he's saying, while God sees us as personal, he wants us to see the relationship between him and us as personal. So he's our creator. The other thing that he mentions there is he says, remember now your creator in the days of your youth. Well, when you see the word youth, what do you think of? Adolescence, teenage. And I do think that's probably what he's talking about. But I also think that youth is subjective to where we're at. For instance, if you see a 40-year-old that, like, they're 40 and they're like, wow, I'm 40. I cannot believe, man, I feel so old. But the person who just turned 70 laughs and like, wow, I remember when I was 40, what I could do if I was 40 again.
My favorite birthday card or whatever says, now, doesn't this birthday make that depression you had at 30 seem silly?
So really, youth is, for a 70-year-old, could be 40. For a 30-year-old, 17 seems young. It's no matter where we are. I mean, if you look at an 85-year-old, he was like, wow, when I was 70, I was so healthy. You know what I'm saying? So it's really subjective. And what Solomon is essentially saying is, there's a word there that really hit me this week. He's saying, remember now your creator. So he's really saying wherever you are now is your youth. I mean, yes, he is trying to refer back to adolescence and teenage years. He's trying to get young people to follow. But he's saying, remember now. So no matter where you are in your life, because right now you're young compared to where, Lord willing, you will be 20 years from now when you're old. You're going to look back and think 50, in my case 55, is young. So there you go, Kayla.
Remember your creator.
Yeah, remember your creator now.
I'll be
But
42 and 20.
Wonderful.
It'll go really fast.
But at the same time, don't you see that? That's what God said to me out of this. Solomon's saying, remember now. Remember now your youth. We are young by some standards. So think about it. What are we waiting for? And so what Solomon knew is that our lives are really based on what we're doing for us. We're working. What do we work so hard for? We're working so hard because we want to have a good retirement so we can enjoy life. We work extra hard and overtime so we can have a nicer car or the bigger house. We want nice stuff, don't we? I mean, we do. Let's just be honest. And most of us in this room are very blessed. We have nicer stuff than what we need. We could survive on less house than we have. We don't have to have the newest cars. We don't have to take all the fancy trips, but we want them. And what Solomon is saying is that don't just put it all into that. Remember your creator now in the days of your youth, because eventually the evil days are going to come. The days of diversity are going to come. The days when you're older and you don't have the energy to serve God like you really would like to. So why wait? Why don't wait till you have till you get to a place where now you have all the time, but you don't have the energy or you don't have the strength. And he's going to go into great detail in these seven verses about these specific things. He says eventually, end of verse 1, you're going to come to the point where you say, I have no pleasure in them. In other words, in the days that you work so hard for to get to, eventually you're going to be like, I'm not even happy with the days that I have because I can't do anything. And now he's going to go into great detail, starting in verse 2, into what's going to happen in our lives. This is what you have to look forward to, Caleb. Some of us are here. Some of us are here, and some of us are getting here. Okay?
Gloom, despair.
Yeah, gloom and despair. That's right. So in verse 2, he says, while the sun or the light or the moon or the stars be not darkened, nor the clouds return after the rain. So he's saying, remember, preface this. Everything that he's saying, remember to serve your Creator now before this happens. So before verse 2 happens, serve your Creator in your youth. So in other words, while the sun is still bright, the stars are still bright, the moon is still bright, before rain clouds come and continually darken your day, in other words, it's just one thing that compounds upon another. You finally get over one hill, you're feeling better, and now something else breaks. It's just constant doctor visits. It's constant this. It's constant more pills, constant prescriptions. Before all these things happen, serve your Creator while you have the energy. Don't wait. Verse 3, in the days when the keepers of the house shall tremble. This is a reference to your hands. You've seen that with older people. They get the tremors. You know, I've known some people that have really beautiful handwriting. And you can see it when they get older. It starts to have a shakiness to it. You can see it in the writing. You can see their signatures change. When you compare it just from 20 years earlier, their signature's not as stable as it once was. It shows signs of aging. And by the way, I mean, shaking and tremors, I looked it up this week. It's not always Parkinson's or early Parkinson's. It's just part of growing older. We get the shakes. We get the tremors. It's part of aging. We've all seen it with older people. It just happens. Then he continues. He says, after the keepers of the house shall tremble, then the strong men shall bow themselves. That's a reference to your legs. Think about what our legs have to do. We put a lot on our legs. You know, we ask a lot of our legs. And eventually, over time, you start to see with older people, their legs, you know, you kind of sag. They're not as straight. You know, you have issues with your knees. You have knee replacements. You know, you got the old man shuffle. You've seen it. The strides are not quite as, you know, your what do you call it with a horse? Your gait. Your gait's not quite with the same pep, because the strong men shall bow themselves. They're not as erect. You know, in your body, you start to kind of hunch. You know, it's just part of growing older. Then it mentions the grinders cease because they are few. This is our teeth. This is, you know, and when you think of teeth, you think of a couple things. First, you've noticed that when you look at an older person, you can see the color of the teeth. It starts to not be as pretty. Now, you can get things done, obviously. Cosmetic surgery can help things with that. But then, you know, with older people, they're missing teeth. I've been through everything you can be through with teeth. I'm very blessed for technology that's helped me with everything with teeth. But, you know, I know people that don't have any teeth, you know, and of course when we were growing up, you know, technology has done really good, but when we were younger, we remember a lot of old men, hey, you there, Tony? You know, they got that little thing. They don't have the jawbone is all gone, and it just sucks up, and everything's, you know, just not, you know, the distance between chewing takes a while because there's more distance there, you know, because the grinders are few. So, you know, with horses, one of the things they can do, they can tell a horse's age by looking at their teeth. And you can do the same with older people. You can look at a person's teeth. If there's a body found, like, you know, I like to watch these murder shows. You know, if they find a body, they can look at the teeth and kind of get an idea on the age of someone by determining the age of their tooth. So Solomon makes reference to the grinders. They will be few, and it takes longer time to eat. Okay? And then he says, and those that look out of the windows be darkened. And so obviously this is referring to eyesight, but I wondered if this couldn't also be referring to cataracts. You know, cataracts make
couldn't do surgery back then.
Couldn't do surgery. That's right. You couldn't remove the cataracts. And so it could be that just, you know, everything gets dim. He continues in verse 4. He says, and the doors shall be shut in the streets when the sound of the grinding is low, and he shall rise up at the voice of the bird, and all the daughters of music shall be brought low. Now I noticed different commentators think different things about this verse as to what it's saying, but the general consensus by most of them is that it's referring to hearing, on what you can and cannot hear. So he's saying here that the older person's ears, it's a little bit inconsistency with older people as you start to lose your hearing and what you can and cannot hear. So he mentions here that the sound of the mill grinding is something that cannot hear. So in other words, the ordinary average things like maybe hearing if someone lived near a grinding of a mill where they were grinding corn or something, you can't hear that sound. Maybe factories. The normal things that you would normally hear, you cannot hear. Highway noise, things like that. Are you experiencing that?
Well, we live up the hill from the interstate, so at times if you listen, you can hear that. And what's amazing is at night, all the way down the train going through Trestle, you can hear the train at night.
Because that's a low frequency sound, and the highway is a high frequency sound, and you lose your high frequencies first because they are first in your cochlea.
Okay, that's a great segue. Because that's exactly what Solomon is saying, but he didn't say it quite that way.
Very science-driven.
Yeah.
I don't have any experience with ears at all.
So he says that you can't hear the sound of the mill grinding, but he shall rise up at the voice of a bird. So in other words, he can hear the high frequency thing, or sometimes it's inconsistent. So in other words, an older person can't hear things that we all can hear, but in sleep at night, one little sound can wake him up that wouldn't wake up the normal person, won't wake up Kayla. But by the time he'll wake up, it's some little sound, it wakes him up because his hearing is different.
She is the
So the it's not just that the person hears that little noise that normally they would have never noticed when they were younger. They normally would have slept right through it. But now as they age, this little noise is enough to annoy them and they wake up, and it says that they rise up. In other words, they don't even have to set an alarm. They hear a little bird in the morning and it just wakes them up at 4:30 and they're up. And they don't even bother going back to sleep because they can't go back to sleep. You talk to older people, and this is common. They just wake up early. That's what they do. They go to bed early. They wake up early. But it doesn't take much to wake them up. Are you? You can resonate with all this. So
I'm a very light sleeper. I go to bed early and I wake up early.
you're going to make a good old lady. So in addition, we'll leave it right there. In addition to these other issues with hearing, it says they cannot hear the. How does yours say it? Mine says, "All the daughters of music shall be brought low." How does yours say that?
But all their songs grow faint.
The songs grow faint. And so, in other words, they can't hear the things they want to hear. So when you're in their house, the TV volume's up really high because they're trying to hear.
And trying to understand.
Very quiet.
But then it's inconsistent because then they go to church and they say the music is way too loud. You see what I'm saying? But here's the deal. That's the difference that's happening. That's what's going on with as we get older. The ears are more sensitive to certain frequencies and not others, as you mentioned. And I do think that I will admit, I've heard worship leaders criticize older people for this, and they need to be more sympathetic. They really do. There are older people that we should be more sympathetic to that. Even I, a couple Sundays ago, thought the music was too loud. Like it was overbearing the singers. Like you need to turn down the volume on the instruments and so we can hear the singers. And so, I understand. I'm starting to get sympathetic with the older people. And before I would have just said they're just fussing to fuss. And I can even almost name some individuals that would do it. But we as a church ought to probably be considerate of those folks. Then verse 5. He says, and then also when they shall be afraid of that which is high, and fears shall be in the way. Let me just stop there. So at some point, when we get older, height is an issue. You may have, when you were a kid, did you ever do like I used to do? I would never do it now, but like I used to like to swing as high as I could on the swing set and jump off. But I would not even think about doing that now. There's limitations to what I know when I do. And I've always had an issue with height, so for me, I'm already there. But, as you get older, you realize that you don't have the balance that you had, and heights scare you. You know your limitations. With that also, he mentions that, and fear shall be in the way. This is referring to driving. Not really, but it could be. Where you see an older person, and they're stuck in a 50-mile-an-hour world. While the world is moving 70 miles an hour, they're in this 50 or 45-mile-an-hour world. And I ran into one of those the other day. I'm like, lady, move it or lose it. I mean, seriously. Yeah, so that I drive a little slower than most. So if this lady was going slow, she really was going slow. But older people, they don't want to be in real busy highways. They don't want to get on 280 because they don't have the reflexes mentally and physically to react to the world that's moving so fast around them. Even when it's not moving fast for us, it is for them. And so they don't want to be around these ever-changing conditions. Then next he mentions that the almond tree shall flourish. Well, that's a reference to our hair. As our hair begins to whiten. And some of you probably have whiter hair than what you're wearing, but
And some of us just wear it.
and some of you just wear it. That's right. But you ever notice, though, while there is a grayish hair that comes in, as you get to really more to a definitive older age, it turns more white as opposed to
Some people
gray.
get white hair, some people's hair.
Yeah, it's not always consistent.
That
But
white hair is always so pretty.
But it is, and usually the whiter hair is as you really, really are getting older. I mean, we were at a family reunion, and I hadn't seen. Yeah, I hadn't seen some older people at our family reunion.
He's
Yeah.
digging his hole deep today.
But some of these people that I hadn't seen in a while, I've noticed that while their hair was gray before, and I thought they're old, their hair has definitely changed a lot more. It's more of an almond tree color. It's more white. And so that's what he's referring to there. Then he makes reference to a grasshopper. He says that, where I lost my place. The grasshopper shall be a burden. This grasshopper, it could be a couple things, I think, here. This is one of those areas where a lot of commentators have opinions about what that's referring to.
Drags itself.
Drag, yeah, I saw some to that, but then all others said that made reference that like when you're younger, you're kind of like a grasshopper. You're just hopping around everywhere. You're just what did I used to call? What was the word that? Bounds and frolics. Yeah, you bound and frolics. There's a girl that I know that she's always using terms like that. She has a good grasp of the English language. So she said something to me about just bounds and frolics, and I thought that. So every time I see her now, I call her Bounds and Frolics. I can't even remember her name. I just call her Bounds and Frolics. What is her name? Haley. Yeah, she's an English teacher, so she has a good grasp on the English language. But the grasshopper, that's what they do. And when you're younger, that's what we do. We just hop around. We just have unending energy. And being around my grandsons, that's what they have. They're just little grasshoppers. So while it's also referring to the pep of a grasshopper, I also wondered where it says here, and the grasshopper shall be a burden. I may be twisting this a little bit, but I think this is also emblematic of older people. That little things like a grasshopper get on their nerves. You ever notice older people get grouchy? That little things irritate them. You have to be very careful. That things that wouldn't have bothered them 20 years ago now bother them. Certain noises bother them. Like I can be that way sometimes. I do. Or like when you get older, you get some nicer stuff, and then your grandkids is like, you understood your kids messing it up because you didn't have nicer stuff. But when you get it and your grandkids like don't appreciate it, like that's a brand new refrigerator. Please don't swing on that door. You don't want them doing that kind of stuff. Getting a dent in it when you were younger was like, oh, that's just part of having kids. But now it's like, don't want a dent in that. You get irritated by little things. So the grasshopper's a burden. Next, he makes a reference. He says, and the desire shall fail. I don't know how your Bible says that. Mine says, and the desire shall fail. That's, just make you feel really uncomfortable, Kayla. That's referring to sexual desire. It will fail. It's something that changes as we get older. I don't know when that fails. I'm sure it's different with everybody, but I'm sure at some point it fails. And, unfortunately, our world, I can only speak from a man's perspective on this today because, it used to be for a woman, it had to be uncomfortable when you had all these commercials on, with different feminine products. I'll put it that way. But now for us men, it's gotten a little uncomfortable for me with my grandsons when every other commercial's on with some little different color pill. And, it's like enough is enough already, and really in essence, I don't know that that's really helping men.
Do either
I really
of those
don't.
need commercials?
At some point, I think the desire needs to fail. That's just the nature of it. But men want to encourage it, and I think it ends up in the end, I think, hurting men, especially Christian men. But that's not Bible. That's just my opinion.
One of the things that I had heard about that is that as you grow older, it is natural for that desire to fail because you begin moving into the stages where you begin to know what marriage is really all about. It's about the companionship, the friendship, and intimacy in other ways. You grow closer to each other with regard to other things. You take more trips together, you spend more time together. Like Suzanne and I, we read books to each other, stuff like that. It just naturally it changes. When you're young, you don't think about a relationship and intimacy and friendship and companionship in those terms.
That's really neat. That's a great point. I like that a lot.
It's normal.
It's normal, yes. But what our world doesn't want it. They want to change what God's way is and make it a different way. Then he continues. He says after that, because man, I love this. I love this wording of this. Because man goes to his long home. I love that. I don't know how your version says it, but the Authorized says, because man goes to his long home and the mourners go about the streets. This is a very poetic way to say this, that a man goes to his long home. And so it's really a poetic way to say that death is imminent. It's coming. He's going to his long home. And the long home is implying the grave, that the long home is your grave. In other words, you're going to live, technically, not spiritually, but you're going to live longer in your grave than you're going to live longer on earth. And the earth has been here for 8,000 years, and you really, for the most part, you could say that more humans have lived longer in the grave than they've lived in their life over these last 8,000 years. And so, we don't know that that'll be for us. I mean, Jesus may come back. We don't know. But for what Solomon is saying here, and it's been proved out since the thousands of years that he's written it, is that our bodies live longer in the long home than they do in this home. So I think it's an interesting way to say it. Then he makes mentions of the funeral processions, when you see the hearse going down the street. He says, and the mourners go about the streets. So as people die and they're going to the grave, then you see what you see as you get older. You start to see that your friends are dying. And eventually you get to the point where, Lord willing, and God gives you a long life, you end up having most of your friends are gone. And you see more and more of them. You're going to more and more funerals. You're one of these mourners on the streets as your friends and your relatives go, your parents and others go to their long home, so to speak. So this is referring to the public rituals that you see, that we even celebrate today as we pull over when we see a hearse and cars following it, and we turn on our headlights in respect to those who are mourning.
Only in the South.
Yeah, only in the South. Yeah, that's true. Verse 6. Then in verse 6 he says, ever the silver cord be loosed, or the golden bowl be broken, or the pitcher be broken at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the cistern. This is referring to a couple things. The silver cord is thought by most referring to the spinal cord. It's loose. It's not as straight as it was. It's kind of not as tight as it was. So you see these people kind of in a hunched over look. It's just part of aging. The golden bowl is thought by many and most commentators to be the brain. And when I got to thinking about this being the brain, it brought me back to verse 1. So if the golden bowl is the brain, the head, the brain, you think about, what do older people struggle with? Memory. Memory, and normally in short-term memory. As you get older, that is where you struggle most. If you ever talk to an older person, And you can tell they're struggling with short-term memory, even when they sometimes don't know who you are. You know any of those people? They don't know you. That's tough to be around people that you love and they don't know who you are. But have you ever noticed those people can always remember long-term? They can remember in great detail something about their childhood or when they first got married. And it hit me. When I thought about that this week, I went back to verse 1. What did Solomon say? Remember in your youth. Remember now in your youth. And what he's saying there is that what you remember, what you gave a conscious effort to remember when you're younger years is what you're going to remember most in your older years. And that's why older people can remember, like for instance, memorizing for me now is tough. I'll just be honest with you. It is. I use Google Calendars for everything. Everything. I mean, even for simple things like taking my cholesterol pill. I will forget every night. I have a reminder. At 22:30 every night, 10:30 every night, I have a reminder that tells me to take it. If I've got something to do tomorrow, it could be 15 minutes from now. I'll just put on there, remind me in 15 minutes to do the so-and-so. Tommy will tell you, I use it all the time. Short-term memory is terrible. But I can remember my first verse I learned when I was 5 years old in Mark 16:15. I remember Psalms 1. I remember the passages that I remember from my youth. They'll be with me in my older age. And in my older age, when, as Solomon said, I will hate the days that I'm living in. The evil days are coming. When I'm not enjoying my older years and I'm not enjoying the burdens of being old, I will have the comfort of the memories of my youth. That's why it's so important that young people like Kayla put all their effort into making good memories in their youth towards God, because then in her older age, she will have that to draw back on. Those verses that I remember I went to a Christian school all my life. Those passages that I remember in my youth are ingrained in me. They're there. They always will be. If I had to try to remember Psalms, the whole chapter of Psalms 1 today, I couldn't do it. But I did when I was younger, and it's there. It's in there. It's accessible for my memory. So that's why when I saw the golden bowl shall be broken, it's referring more to the short-term memory, not the long-term. As I was writing this in my Chromebook this week, I heard a song. You got to look up this song. Tommy and I listened to it on the way to church this morning. It's called Talking to Jesus. It's featuring Brandon Lake. You have got to hear this song. It's an 8-minute song. It's a wonderful song. You need to listen to this song. Right as I was writing my notes about short-term memory and about long-term, about remembering the days of my youth, this song came on. It wasn't by accident. I know it wasn't. I sent it to my son last night. He won't listen to it probably, but I wished he would. It's called Talking to Jesus featuring Brandon Lake. Seriously, listen to this song. If you don't get emotional while you're listening to it, something's wrong with you. It is really, really good. So anyway, the remainder of this verse, he's talking about drawing water at a well. The pitcher will be broken at the fountain, or the wheel at the cistern. What he's talking about is the basic necessities of life. Like, for instance, in that day, in that culture, you need water to survive, and you have to go to the well to get it. And what he's saying is that the very simple things that you could normally do to just sustain your life, like going to Walmart and getting groceries, that would be the equivalent, or just making it to the doctor's office, or just being able to mow the grass, or take care of little things around your house. Things that used to be nothing all of a sudden become a huge chore. You run out of breath. You have to sit down. You can't do it. Because why? Because the wheel's broken. The pitcher's broken at the fountain. The little things that you always could do, you can't do now. Then verse 7. Oh, I love this verse. Every time we have a chapter that we read for the week, and I always go over it. There's always one verse that jumps out at me. This was the verse. Verse 7. I love this verse. He says, "Then shall the dust return to the earth as it was, and the spirit shall return unto God who gave it. Oh, this is really good. This is so beautiful. I love this. So, as I mentioned earlier about the body that forms in the mother's womb, that body, yes, it did come from our mother, and yes, it was made of dust. I know, yeah, technically it comes from the mother, but you say, well, the mother's made of dust. Well, she wasn't. She was born of a mother. But if you go all the way back, just keep going back all these generations, you eventually get to Adam, and he was made of dust. And if you look at the human body, 97% of what we're made of is the same stuff that's in dirt. 97%.
That's what I was gonna say, as a chemistry teacher, we're made up of certain elements.
Of dirt, of dust.
Of dirt, of the stuff that just dirt and everything else is made out of, and it's just put together in a different way.
And it's just borrowed. It's just borrowed. We're just borrowing it for 70 years or however long we live, some shorter, some longer. And we're just borrowing it. And when we're done with it, where's it go? It just goes back to where it came from. And then he says, and the spirit, oh, this is the part I love. The spirit shall return unto God who gave it. Some of y'all listen to Rush Limbaugh, some of y'all didn't. But he always used to use a thing where he'd say, talent on loan from God. And after he died, because he did profess to be a Christian, and especially towards the end, he really was talking more about his spiritual relationship with God. And there was this cartoon that somebody drew after his death, and it showed God it showed Rush in heaven giving his talent back to God. It was kind of cute. I know that's kind of a cheap way to say this, but in essence, though, God has given us the spirit. And see, the mother, she helps produce the body, but she doesn't give the spirit. The spirit is borrowed from God, because the body's nothing without the spirit. It's just a body. And so we're giving the spirit back to God where it returned. It's his. And if we could all just grasp that, even people that are not Christians understand the very person that they are, not their body. This is just a dust. This is just what we live in. The you is inside of this. And it's that person that will be returned one day to the Creator. And that's why I listen to all these debates all the time. I don't know why I do. I love these debates between atheists and Christians. I listen, I spend hours listening to them. I don't know why I do it, but I do. But I'm always puzzled, like the atheist, like your spirit, the fact that you're questioning, the fact that you're debating. I mean, none of the other God's creation does that. It doesn't debate whether or not the Creator made it or that it's made by something. It doesn't have the ability to do that. Only God's Spirit gives you that innate ability to even think about something with that kind of depth. But eventually it will be returned to God. Then verse 8, I wish we could actually hear Solomon say this, because when you read it, it's kind of monotone. But I think if we could hear Solomon's voice when he said it, he would say it it wouldn't be passive. It would be vanity of vanities. All is vanity. I think Solomon would say this different than what it reads. In other words, meaningless. It's just meaningless. It's futile. All these things that are under the sun that we think are so important, they're just vanity. And I got to thinking this week, I'm sure you guys have things that tempt you. You all have your weaknesses. Everybody does. What tempts you is probably different than what tempts me. But I got to thinking about it this week. It's just vanity. Well, why? Why do I get tempted by this? It's just vanity. It means it's meaningless. It's futile. Why do I put any effort? Why does it tempt me when it means nothing? It means nothing. Anyway, I think Solomon would really say that with a lot of passion if we could hear his words. Then in verse 9, he says, and moreover, because the preacher, that's Solomon, was wise, and by the way, this is not him bragging. This is not a self-complimentary type of statement here that he's making, but rather it's an acknowledgement of what God gave him, the wisdom God gave him. He was wise. He asked God for wisdom. God gave it to him. He knew he was wise. He's not bragging. He's saying, and moreover, because God gave me wisdom, and the preacher was wise, he still taught the people the knowledge. He still taught the people knowledge. Yes, he gave good heed and sought out and set in order many proverbs. And of course, it's interesting that we see the word proverbs because we know he wrote much of the book of Proverbs. And this book, in some ways, I questioned earlier as to why he would write this. This book is one of the many reasons that he wrote it, was for us to have this knowledge. He's seeking out ways to disperse this wisdom that God gave him. And this book, this Ecclesiastes book that he wrote in here, is for us. It's a way that we can read what he left behind for us, so that we can seek out. We see the Proverbs. Now, I don't know that I'd recommend a lot of the things he did in order to seek out wisdom, but nonetheless, I would definitely read what the results were of what he did. And so we have the benefit of seeing a man that what's the word I'm looking for, that exposed himself to every element of trying to seek wisdom, and we can see the results and take his advice through it. And then in verse 10 he says, the preacher, again referring to himself in the third person, sought to find out acceptable words, and that which was written was upright, even words of truth. So I get the sense here that when he says to sought to find out acceptable words, in other words, he's trying to look for ways to communicate truth. And we still do that today. We're still looking for different ways to communicate truth. Of course, Solomon didn't have the means we have. We have all kinds of ways to communicate truth today. Think about it. We get emails. Do you get, some of y'all might get daily devotions, daily text messages, ways that give you a little tip of truth, little morsels. Or perhaps you're on a D-Life passage that you read every day. We have so many different ways. Twitter and Instagram, ways we can disperse truth. I watching The Chosen this week. I just with my prayer partner. It's what a great way the truth is disseminated with that. That's just such a great. I love that series. I really do. One of the things I love about The Chosen most, and there's so many things I love, but like we were watching the episode where Jacob. It starts off with Jacob digging a well, and he's got his sons there, and he's trying to find water. And one of the locals comes up, and is trying to say, "Why are you looking for water there? You're not going to find water." And he starts talking about his God. My God wants me here, and this guy's really skeptical. Like, well, you do realize that your gods can't help you find water or whatever. And then about that time, his sons say, "Dad, and there's water, and you see the water bubbling up through the dirt, and then it segues thousands of years, and all of a sudden the next scene you see is the woman at that same well, drawing water, where eventually Jesus is going to meet that woman at the well." And it's thousands of years later, there's still water coming from that well. I just love The Chosen.
It's still there today.
And it's still there.
It has water.
I love that segue of how it takes the Old Testament and then it just, it's the foreshadowing, and then boom, it applies it straight to the new. And that's what I love about The Chosen. And so there's all these means and ways that we can still advance the truth today. And Solomon was just giving us the way that he had in his day. And then very quickly, we got to move on here. Is the other class coming in? I feel the pressure sometimes of them coming. Verse 13, I love the way he words this. He says, "Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter." Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. And what is his conclusion? Fear God and keep his commandments. For this, and there's this, a whole duty of man. It's the responsibility. It's because he's our creator. Because we're his creation, there's a responsibility to him. And by the way, Solomon's not speaking to a very specific group of people here. He's speaking in a broad sense to all of us. He's speaking, whether he didn't know it, he had no idea, he's speaking to the 21st century. He would have no idea, that we could read what he wrote on a device or a tablet. He would be freaked out by that. But all these years later, we have the ability to read to what he wrote. And he wrote that we are to fear God and keep his commandments. The fearing of God is reverence, the reverence of God. When I was younger, I feared or respected my parents. And because I feared or respected my parents, I kept their commandments. And so we are to do the same thing with God. We are to reverence him, and it helps us keep his commandments. And he says in verse 14, "For God shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. It's keeping this idea that life is short. There's this man. I was looking. I found a story this week. Can I just pull this up real quick? I don't really know that it applies, but I just thought of it. And I actually sometimes when I find a story, again, this is another thing I do. When I find something, I text something to myself. Do you ever text something to yourself?
All the time.
Do you? Okay. Well, I texted this. Let me find it. I found this story. Have any of you heard of a guy named Arthur Stace or Stas? S-T-A-C-E. I'm not sure how it's pronounced. This guy lived in Australia, and you can look him up. Arthur Stace, I guess. It's S-T-A-C-E. He was an alcoholic from his teenage years, and in his older life, he stumbles on a church, and it's an evangelist that's in town. And let me see if I can actually find it here. It's in November of 1932. He hears an evangelist named John G. Ridley. And this preacher said, "Eternity, eternity, I wish that I could sound or shout that word to everyone in the streets of Sydney. You've got to meet it. Where will you spend eternity?" And for some reason, those words really resonated with this man named Arthur, and he gave his life to Christ. But the words eternity are what really resonated with him. And he was illiterate. He couldn't barely even write his own name. But for some reason, it says here that even though he was illiterate and could hardly write his own name, the word eternity came out smoothly when he began to write it. And he began to get a piece of chalk he would just keep with him. And everywhere he would go, he would write the word eternity on sidewalks, at the exits and entrance of doors. He wrote it everywhere, to the point where it started to become a nuisance to some of the law enforcement, and they started to try to find him, but they never could catch him doing it. They would just always find him, but he'd always be gone. But it was said that even though he couldn't write his name legibly, the word eternity was always written, and there's actually a copy of it you can see where he wrote the word eternity in beautiful cursive handwriting. Just beautiful. Probably maybe comes from just practice of just constantly writing the word eternity. And it's said that he wrote that word over 500,000 times in the remainder of his life. And eventually there's a bridge that's in Sydney, Australia, that they took and they named it Eternity Bridge after him. And it was actually in the 2001 Olympics or 2000 Olympics. They actually had that bridge in the Olympics. They showed it in the opening ceremonies. But it was just where he began to understand, and the rest of his life he dedicated to Christ, trying to serve people that were in need. He worked with mentally disabled and retarded people, just trying to give the rest of his life to make a difference for eternity. He understood that he had wasted a lot of his life, and he wanted the rest of his life to matter for eternity. And he left that legacy behind. And that's what Solomon is telling us. Serve your Creator now so that you can make a difference for eternity. Don't put all your life into the short life that you got here. Go for the long home. The long home, eternity. Is there anything else that I know I kind of skipped over this quickly. There's a lot in this chapter. Was there anything else that you saw that I might have missed in this passage? It's good stuff, though, isn't it? We're all kind of getting in that place that he spoke of, and elements of it I'm starting to notice. Not all of it yet, but I'm getting there definitely. Tommy thinks more, but she is too. That she doesn't acknowledge hers. I acknowledge mine.
There's a meme that comes out on social media every few weeks, and it says, in the end, all that really matters is that you have a relationship with Jesus Christ. And it just sums up life, right there. And I think Solomon's, he's trying to say the same thing, Nothing really matters except for God, who is Jesus, who hadn't come yet when he wrote this. But say meaningless, but she said, you know what? Nothing really matters in this life.
It's vanity.
It's really all about Jesus. That's what this all boils down to.
What's the old saying? What's the old saying? Only one life will soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. And I think as we get older, we're starting to realize that. If we could just, the thing is that what Solomon realized, though, is that he looked back at his life with regret. Yeah, he had started off so good, but he wished he could go back. Don't y'all wish maybe you could? I wouldn't want to go back, but I wouldn't want to relive all of it. But I do wish I could change certain decisions I made. I would make some changes, for sure. And, Solomon's trying to warn us. We're in our youth, believe it or not. We're in our youth. And we got to think that. Remember your Creator in the days of youth. Somebody trying to get my attention? On Zoom? Let me turn the volume up. I'm sorry. Hey. Go, Brother Mike.
It's ironic you're talking about Mr. Stace and the word eternity, had a great bearing on his salvation. And it was that way with me. My dear mother, she would just look at you sometime when we had grown up, individually, and she'd say, "Where are you going to spend eternity?" And just real blunt like that. And that I never got away from that. And that it had a great bearing on me. And I came to Christ because.
Well, you'd like that song, Talking to Jesus, then, because it basically talks about that. It starts off with a grandmother, and then it starts off with a father, and then it's have a father to his son. It's generational as they're trying to pass down about how important it is to talk to Jesus. It's a great song. You've got to listen to it. You'll love it. It's a beautiful, beautiful song. I hope my son will listen to it. I really do. Well, guys, I hope you have a great week. I've enjoyed our study of Ecclesiastes, haven't you? Really good. It's helped me. I've needed it. Some things that I've been struggling with, things that I get tempted by. That's going to be my new saying. It's vanity. It's vanity. Don't be tempted by it. It's vanity. It means nothing. In the end, all you have is regret. Like, why did I get suckered by that again? It's vanity. Good stuff. Well, have a great week, y'all. We will see you next week. Batten down the hatches. Supposed to be some big winds coming. Love you guys. See y'all on Zoom.